Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit and welcome to this episode. So in this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you some contemplations for the coming week, which is the week of May 1st, 2023. And my invitation is for you to allow yourself to receive and participate in this web that we're kind of creating together, right? Like thinking about the energy, thinking about the astrology of this week, and allow yourself to tune into what is coming up within you as you're listening to this, because the primary intention of creating the space for contemplation for all of us is to allow knowings to begin surfacing, right? And I can share with you what I see, but ultimately whatever is coming up for you is what you are going to be working with, because this is your life, this is your path. And so feel free to listen to this while you are walking, or receive this information and make space for your own contemplations in whatever ways feel available to you and feel exciting and feel like you can maximally receive. I also would like to encourage you to play a little bit with, if you found this episode outside of the week of May 1st, this to me is an invitation, because oftentimes we are drawn to certain things because there's resonance for us there, right? And so if you are finding yourself listening to this and you're like, I'm not really living in the week of May 1st, that's totally cool. Feel free to receive this information not simply as kind of a weather forecast, right? Which is a very valid way of working with these particular transmissions. However, my invitation is for you to trust that perhaps there's something here. There's something in the archetypes that we are talking about, in the energies that we are talking about here, that is part of what you're working with in this specific moment of your life, right? So allow it to almost be like an oracular pull. Let it speak to you in whatever ways it wants to speak to you, and play with the astrology, right? Play with the energy. Play with the messages that are here. All right, so as always, I like to begin with a little bit of a rundown of the astrology of the week ahead. On Monday, the 1st, Pluto will be going retrograde and the Sun will be conjoining Mercury, which is currently retrograde in Taurus. And so we have what we call a Mercury Cosmic, right? And this is an interesting part in the Mercury cycle where there's perhaps more illumination, perhaps there's a little bit more awareness that kind of opens up, right? Mercury retrograde tends to be known as, or has this reputation of things being a little wonky. Our mental processes are kind of turning inwards rather than outwards, right? So that may be part of your experience, that may not be part of your experience, depending on a lot of things. And I would say that Mercury Cosmic can be a really powerful time, especially if you've been feeling a lot of fogginess around how you communicate, some things maybe not going as smoothly as you would like it to be, communications not being as clear, that Mercury Cosmic can provide a little bit of a relief, right? But that the other side of it can be true too. Like if you have been enjoying this retrograde and things have been really going swimmingly, you might find that the Kazimi brings something up that you're like, oh, I'd rather not see that, right? So this can work in multiple different ways. On Thursday, May 4th, Venus in Gemini will create a square with Neptune in Pisces. On Friday, Venus will sextile Jupiter in Aries. And then we also have a lunar eclipse in Scorpio, right? So this is the second eclipse in a Mars-ruled sign. We just had a solar eclipse, which was happening in 29 degrees Aries, right? Another sign ruled by Mars. And so we have this push and pull, right, between Mars and Venus. The sun, which is currently next to Uranus and next to Vesta in Taurus, is ruled by Venus in Gemini. And then the moon in Scorpio during this full moon is ruled by Mars in Cancer. And so what's significant about this particular eclipse is that this is the last eclipse in Scorpio until 2040, right? So this is the end of a particular cycle in which we have been learning about the Taurus-Scorpio lessons. And then on Sunday, the 7th, Venus will enter Cancer. And so I think when I really felt into this week, a recurring theme that keeps coming up to me is this idea of surrendering to curiosity, right? As you can see, Venus plays a major role in this coming week. Venus is creating a bunch of aspects to the different planets. And so there are activations that have to do with the Venusian realm of pleasure, of ease, of comfort. And there's also activation happening in the Martian realm, right? Especially with the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. And as we know, Venus and Mars are kind of opposite one another, you know, as a principle, as an archetype, right? It's also interesting that Venus is in Gemini, and Gemini is a land or a landscape or an atmosphere, a place that we've spent a lot of time in the past year or so, right? In the fall, Mars entered Gemini, and then Mars spent about 7 months in Gemini. And so this is the realm, right? The Gemini realm, the mutable air realm, is one where we have spent a lot of time in, and probably the nature of Mars being quite confronting, we have experienced some challenges. We have experienced some confusion. We have experienced some erraticness, or maybe even destruction a little bit in the area of Gemini, right? And Venus coming in here, Venus has been in Gemini for the past few weeks. And so I think that we have probably learned a little bit about the distinction between Venus being in Gemini versus Mars being in Gemini. And so in the last stretch of the last few degrees that Venus will be in Gemini, it's interesting that Venus is answering to Mercury, which is currently going retrograde in Taurus, right? And to me, this is something that is interesting to contemplate, because how it feels with Mercury being in Taurus going retrograde to me is that some of us may be moving through a new process, right? We may be finding that, you know, this is always true, by the way, that we are in a new situation, and that finding ourselves in a new situation can be quite jarring, right? Because we may find that our body responds differently to some of the same stimulus, just because a certain friend, you know, maybe comes back to our lives, a friend that we used to be very close to. We may find that how we respond to them, or how we want to respond to them, has shifted since the last time we had a particular interaction with them, right? And so Mercury's retrograde motion in Taurus may look like holding space for the discomfort that is coming up for us when we can't fully articulate what is going on just yet, right? Our body is telling us, hey, we are in a process of transformation. We are in a process of moving through a new chapter, right? Or moving into a new chapter. And yet, we haven't cognitively caught up yet. There may be a sense of like, but I don't know yet exactly what this chapter brings for me. And yet my body is kind of telling me we're in a new territory. You know, to borrow the famous line from the movie Wizard of Oz, right? I think Dorothy said something along the lines of, wow, Toto, we are not in Kansas anymore. That's kind of the vibe that I think we are experiencing here. And so what I would like to invite you to contemplate is this concept of curiosity. So one of the things that I love about the Gemini energy, and I have the moon in Gemini natally in my chart, is how the Gemini energy can borrow or can manufacture or can ride on very strong waves of energy when it is moving in the direction of its curiosity, right? Gemini is often correlated with, or Gemini often is represented by the energy of the butterfly, right? Or the energy of the bee, the energy of the pollinator, the insect that moves from one flower to another and simply in its movement, right, pollinates flowers, creates this beautiful garden, right? I would even say that flies are very Gemini. And so when I think about Gemini, and specifically Venus in Gemini, Venus rules pleasure. And so there's something about Venus that has to do with following the resonance, right? Following the resonance that is present in the body, in the mind. And a lot of us have been conditioned out of our curiosity, right? Curiosity often feels very scary in the culture that we live in now, because curiosity doesn't give us the highs and the lows, right? That the certainty of drama gives us, quite frankly. When we think about our culture and how we are so inundated with information, the constant news cycle, the endless scroll of social media, right? The World Wide Web, which literally the internet is like this ocean, right, of information, of stimulus. We are living in waves of constant dopamine hits, right? We are constantly stimulated. We are constantly being pushed to respond to, do I want to do this or do I not want to do this, right? How do I respond to this reel? Leave a comment, right? Answer to this person's text message. And so oftentimes when we want to activate the part of us that is connected to our innate curiosity, what we may need to do is to find a place of emptiness. And so this is where I think the square, right, that Venus will be making to Neptune, which is in Pisces, right? Pisces ruling the watery realm, I think has to do with learning about how true curiosity can only really come from a negative space, from having a little bit of emptiness, right? And this is interesting because during this past week, I've been talking with a few friends about this idea of emptying in order to fill in, right? And that oftentimes when we haven't properly created the space to empty out the all of the stimulus, right? All of the reactions within our bodies that we have accumulated from receiving too much information, we can feel a little numb, right? We can experience a different kind of emptiness. So this is, I think, quite interesting because the emptiness that I'm talking about here that leads to curiosity is kind of an emptiness that comes from having release things, right? This is true vacuum. This is negative space, right? Whereas there's another kind of emptiness that we can sometimes experience when we talk about emptiness in this culture, which is the kind of emptiness that is about numbness, right? That we feel empty existentially often because we are so numb. And what is numbness if not a byproduct of overwhelm, right? Often numbness can either tell us that the health of a particular system, like maybe in our body, when we feel numb, when our fingers feel numb, maybe it's because it's too cold, right? That we are in an environment that doesn't support our life force energy to move the way that it's supposed to move. And also at the same time, numbness can come from us having received too much within our field, right? And we don't know anymore how to distinguish between what is truly ours and what is another person's. We don't know how to distinguish between the questions that are genuinely interesting to us versus the questions that are that we feel this compulsion to answer simply because there's a certain level of pressure coming in from the outside world, right? And so curiosity is not often charged, right? And I think this is interesting because what I mean by charge is this experience within our body, within our nervous system, right? Of feeling like we need to act or we need to react, right? That's what we call a charge. Or we feel this visceral reaction of wanting to pull away or run away, right? Or do something sudden, do something to fix or to move that sensation away from our space, right? Curiosity is about slowing down a little bit. Curiosity is about, hey, what's going on here? Curiosity is also about not having an agenda, which again, when we think about how our culture is so used to, has normalized having an agenda and has perhaps villainized like a certain level of blankness, right? Like we always need to know what our purpose is. We always need to know where we're going. We need to know what the direction is, right? I'm thinking about, when I first took writing, like essay writing classes, right? Like even in high school, we were always taught that a good essay needs to have 3 points and it needs to make a very clear point, right? Is this essay against or for, right? We're not taught to deal with uncertainty in a way that makes space for our humanity. Because the truth is, even, when we're thinking, say, from the perspective of the internal family systems, right? There are many different parts of us. And these different parts, they all have their needs. They all have their agenda. And sometimes their needs and agenda are in opposition to one another, right? So if we want to approach these different parts of us, if we want to approach the different communities or the different relationships that hold our existence in the greater web of life, with an intention to bridge, to create bridges rather than to create divisions, then we need to come with an awareness of what our biases and our prejudice are, and we need to approach, the different sides with an element of curiosity, right? And curiosity, to me, what's so challenging about curiosity is that curiosity doesn't always have a direction, right? There's no guarantee that applying curiosity is going to lead us to the outcome that is favorable to us. And in fact, in order for us to truly show up with curiosity, often we need to really give ourselves permission to release any and all prejudices, any and all agenda, or at the very least, if we don't release them, right? Give ourselves a little bit of extra space. between us and that agenda. And I think that in having a little bit of that space, we can expand our ability to hold different perspectives, right? To hold different information that are sometimes contrasting, that sometimes perhaps doesn't quite feel like they fit together, right? And I think that one question to maybe explore with regards to curiosity, thinking about how this Venus in Gemini that is activated quite a bit during this week answers to Mercury in Taurus, is, do I know what curiosity feels like in my body? How can I know when I'm in that space of curiosity? How can my body show me that I am being curious? And I invite you to do this right now, actually, as you're listening to me. When you think about curiosity within yourself, maybe remembering the last time you find yourself curious about something, or curious about a person's profession, or where a person lives, or a person's hobby. What was that experience like for you internally? What is happening? Can you track what the sensations feel like? Maybe it feels like warmth. Maybe it feels like you're a little bit tickled. And can you also perhaps see what posture your body wants to assume, what posture your body might want to come into or step into when you think about curiosity and embodying curiosity? Where might this sensation of curiosity feel threatening to you? Are there any parts of your body that are resisting the experience of being curious? And in contrast, are there parts of your body that are really excited about this curiosity? Or if it's not excited, maybe it feels expansive, right? It feels relaxed. Maybe some parts of your body feels a certain sense of relief and release. So I think it's also interesting to consider the next question, which is, what holds you back from your own curiosity, right? A lot of us have been taught to orient towards having a direction in life, right? Knowing what the outcome will be. This is an exploration that feels very alive for me at the moment because I am currently in the astrology learning container in the course that I'm currently co-facilitating with Britton LaRue. Throughout the month of April, we have been exploring this idea of astrology as a creative practice, right? And something that I'm noticing about my own creative process, be it with this podcast or in my music making, music writing endeavors, in exploring various healing arts and healing modalities, what I'm noticing about my creative life and the way that my creativity wants to move through me is that my creativity needs to decouple from a sense of outcome in order for true, genuine curiosity to actually flow out of me, right? It is very hard for me personally to be in a state of flow when I'm consistently thinking about, am I going in the right direction, right? Is this vehicle, is this boat, is this car moving in the right direction? It's reminding me of that old joke, right? Of like the little kid in the car who's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? If I'm consistently filled up with that energy of, are we there yet? I literally cannot be in my creative flow. And so I think there's something about curiosity that is similar, right? That a lot of us haven't been taught to know what curiosity feels like for us authentically in our bodies. Because curiosity doesn't serve the agenda of all the isms that we live in, right? It doesn't serve capitalism. It doesn't serve, even this picture or this idea of like being a model citizen, right? Curiosity is so often something that we push away because it feels like it doesn't have a function, or it doesn't lead us anywhere that we can engineer towards, right? We're so used to talking about things like career trajectory. This idea of like having a career trajectory means that you need to be able to plot out, right? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And I think I am not in any way saying that this is not a helpful practice for some people, right? I think for a lot of us, it can be really helpful to feel into the energy of what is my intention? Where do I want to go, right? That can provide such an amazing fuel. It can provide such helpful motivation. And also, when that energy is so overly developed, right? When our muscles for figuring out answers to where do you want to be in 5 years, right? When these muscles emotionally are so overdeveloped, we can forget that there is another part of this muscle, which is also about noticing the flow of life, right? And sometimes this actually is quite paradoxical, because the more that we allow ourselves to tune into and to be with and to collaborate with the flow of life, sometimes we end up achieving something at record rate, right? Like what we want to accomplish or what we want to manifest ends up happening for us and coming into our field a lot faster than if we were to fight against it all the time, right? Not always, but sometimes. And so it's interesting to think about why it is that we so prize our ability to analyze, to get to the final destination with a lot of planning, but we don't always give ourselves permission to sit back and to feel into, where's the flow right now? Is the natural flow supporting me to go in this direction? Or maybe I don't have to jump into the river at all, right? Maybe the current is not good at the moment. I can just relax and sip my tea. And I think a lot of what, for me personally, holds myself back from my own curiosity are my shame and my fear, right? There's a certain sense of shame that we have been conditioned into with regards to our curiosity. Think about that child, right? That is always asking, why do we do this? Why do we do that? What is this? What is that? Right? And then eventually the caretaker gets so annoyed and it's just like, just shut up. I was definitely one of those kids. I had a lot of curiosities, and I learned from a very early age that there are spaces, where that's totally welcome. Like certain kinds of curiosities, certain kinds of questions. My primary caretakers, namely my mom and my dad, were really good at helping me with certain questions, right? And then I find myself in a school environment where certain teachers really don't like it if I ask questions, right? And so where have you learned that it's not okay to follow the pulse of your curiosity, right? I think the pulse of our curiosity is in many ways very similar to the pulse of our creativity. The difference being, at least for me, when I tune into my pulse of creativity, it almost feels like there is this huge wave, right? This bright shining, it's almost very solar, right? Like it's like the sun wanting to shine and being like, here I am. And I want to just kind of go into my studio, right? Or my art space and just create from that space. And then when I think about this energy of the pulse of my curiosity, there's also a certain level of activation. There's a certain level of activeness to that energy. But perhaps the difference is that it doesn't move kind of in a straight line, right? There's a way in which it zigzags a little bit. It's like, ooh, I'm curious about this. Ooh, I'm curious about this. And then it can kind of feel like if I mentally plot this energy out, it feels like I'm just kind of being spun, right? But don't forget that spinning can also be wonderful, right? For me personally, when I think about like spinning myself or whipping myself up into excitement that doesn't lead me anywhere, it feels a little bit scary, right? It feels a little bit like, oh, what if I can't get out of this? But let me remind you that the chrysalis is built through spinning, right? When we think about caterpillars creating its chrysalis and then transforming into a butterfly, it has to spin itself, right? Creating a cocoon out of their own saliva and then literally dissolving, right, within that cocoon in order to emerge out as a butterfly. And so I think when I think about the pulse of curiosity, I think the pulse of curiosity has more of this randomness, right? And can we surrender to the randomness? Because if we allow ourselves to not worry so much about where we're going, I think there's something that can really emerge. There's something that curiosity really brings us into a space of tenderness, right? Thinking about Venus later in the week moving into Cancer. Thinking about Cancer as the cardinal water sign that is quite tender, preceding Gemini, right? There's something about following our curiosity that leads us back, I think, to our inner child. That there's this inner child part of us that is intensely, in a way that cannot be satiated, curious about the universe. And I think this is the true lesson of Venus in Gemini. Can we allow our search to be the point? Can we allow our curiosity to lead us back into that tender space of being a child, being filled with wonder of the world that is in front of us? And finally, the last question that I would share with you to contemplate is, what are some of the resources that you need personally in order to return to that state of genuine curiosity? For many of us, in order to come into the state of genuine curiosity, we must forget ourselves. We must momentarily fall into temporary amnesia of the ego identity that we've built up in order to survive as an adult in the world. And so I would like to share a tarot spread that I did that I think speaks to this a little bit. And I was called to pull 3 cards, and the first card speaks to the root of the tree, right? The second card speaks to the trunk of the tree. And the third card speaks to the flower or the leaves of the tree or the branches, right? So you can kind of think about this as what is underneath, what is the grounding, what is hidden, what is not always seen. And then the second card being what is visible at eye level. What are we here to work with? And then above, right, we can think about it as, what do we see when we allow ourselves to look up, when we allow ourselves to be in that posture of wonder? And the first card, this is from the Moonchild tarot. So there are a couple extra cards that Danielle Noel, the artist, has put into this deck. And so the first card doesn't actually correlate to any of the major arcana. This is one of the bonus cards. And the first card says Divine Wisdom. And in this card, there's Isis, the Egyptian goddess, which I would say definitely has connections to Venus. So I love that this card is what came up for us. And in the second position of the trunk, or what we are kind of working with, right? The grounded space of action, of conscious awareness, is the Emperor. And the fruits or the flowers, the branches, the leaves of the reading is the Page of Cups. I love this three combination because I think it's really speaking on a deep level to what we're working with this week, right? With regards to the roots, remember that there's already divine wisdom within you. That even if your curiosity is actually about how do I live a more relaxed life, maybe. How can I take better naps? Which is a question I've been asking myself. That there is within you already deep wells of wisdom. And what if you allow yourself to tune inwards and to allow a process of seeing this divine wisdom, not feeling like you have to go outwards in order to access this wisdom. And then the Emperor, as the trunk of the tree, right, speaks to boundaries, resources, right? The Emperor, to me, is always about how do we resource ourselves, both in terms of protection and also in terms of asking for what we need, or reaching out to someone that we know can assist us with something that we are struggling with, right? When thinking about the Emperor, how this is translating into my life personally is thinking about where are the edges of my capabilities, right? If, let's say, I am having some back pain, then maybe I really need to see someone who can help me with that. Maybe a trusted chiropractor or physical therapist, or maybe a Pilates instructor, right? Something that I can't necessarily do for myself. How can I ask for that help? How can I resource myself with the agency to reach out for help when help is needed? And how can I also trust in my own agency around what I can provide for myself, right? And finally, the flowers of the reading being Page of Cups is just absolutely so beautiful. I think this connects back to the inner child that I was talking about earlier, right? That in allowing yourself to follow your curiosity, what are the knowledges that you are curious about? What are the ways of being that you are curious about? What relationships are you curious about pursuing, right? Maybe there's a new friend, or maybe there's a new budding situationship that you would want to kind of let yourself be drawn to in this moment, right? Or even conversations. Who do you want to have conversations with? And I think in allowing ourselves to go there, what we are often confronted with is this tenderness, right? That the little one within us often feels like we can't go there. There's no way I can possibly be allowed to follow my curiosity. I think the affirmation that our inner child wants to hear from us in this coming week, or wherever it is that you find yourself listening to this, is, can I let myself be that divine child who is really deeply connected to this unlimited well of curiosity about the world, right? How can the world actually be a better place if I allow myself to embrace my inner curious child? All right, that is it. By way of contemplation, I hope that you found something helpful here. I hope that taking the time for contemplating the energies that are present for us has been helpful for you. I hope you are discovering something about your inner state. And I'm excited to see you again whenever that may be. For those of you who are curious about having a reading, I would love to see you. Reach out to me if you feel like a reading would be supportive in this chapter of your journey. I'm sending you so much love, and I hope that you have a beautiful week ahead. Thank you for listening.